Away from the crowd's view, David Norris stands alone, contemplating. Suddenly, an announcer speaks, welcoming him as the new senator from New York. David is young, unafraid to brawl, popular, and leads the polls for the Senate. However, a college prank photo of David's behind surfaces in an article and sways people's favor. Everyone thought he was too immature and his popularity declined. On the roof, four men, including Harry Mitchell and Richardson, prepare for their mission. Later, David goes to the bathroom to practice his speech for a television appearance. While practicing, Elise Salas, a dancer hiding from security, comes out of a stall. Due to the awkward circumstances of her being in the men's room, the two converse and sparks fly. As she leaves, David is enchanted. David does his practice speech and the crowd cheers. However, in a moment of clarity, David tells the crowd that everything, including his tie and shoes, is carefully curated by his team of specialists to achieve a desired public image. Later, Harry Mitchell's supervisor Richardson instructs him to spill coffee on David at 7:05. David wakes up and watches the news announcing his partnership with RSR Venture Capital, founded by his friend and campaign manager, Trainer, in his previous speech that led him to become a frontrunner for the upcoming 2010 Senate race. Trainer tells David and criticizes his idea for the solar panels, but tells him they'll talk in the meeting. While David boards a bus, an exhausted Harry wakes up and chases David. On the bus, David is surprised to see Elise, and the two banter with each other again. Meanwhile, Harry realizes it's past 7:05, so he waves his hand in the air and spills David coffee on the bus, but a cab hits him. The driver helps him up and hands him his notebook. Harry then tracks the bus and gives chase again. While on the bus, David uses Elise's coffee-stained dress as an excuse to get her number. Later, David goes to work and enters the conference room to see that everyone is frozen and officers are scanning people's brains. Richardson sees David and tells his men to go after him. David runs, but somehow Richardson seems to be one step ahead and always intercepts him. Eventually, he gets grabbed and is sedated by Harry. David then wakes up in a room. Richardson tells him they're a group of people that adjust things according to plan. David will be let go, but he has to never meet Elise again. The men then take Elise's number written on a business card and Richardson burns it in front of David. Afterward, the men throw David into an office and Trainer sees him, asking where he's been. Confused, David opens the door where he came from and suddenly, Richardson and his men are gone. In the meeting, David is still dazed while Trainer is now in favor of the new panel idea. Afterward, Trainer learns from David that he lost Elise's number, losing the chance of ever seeing her again. Trainer ends up apologizing, and later in the bar, David tries to remember Elise's number when suddenly, Harry starts talking to him. Harry tells David to meet him at 4 p.m. on a boat, and he'll answer all of his questions. David meets Harry, and he learns that the group is actually different than humans, as they live longer than them. According to Harry, the group monitors the whole world and can perceive other people's choices, and that water blocks their abilities. David learns that, for some reason, the higher-ups spend a lot of resources to keep him away from Elise. With that, Harry advises David to just move on with his life. 3 years later, David still thinks of Elise, and while riding the bus, he sees Elise walking, gets off the bus, and chases right after her. He approaches her, postpones his speech, and they take a walk together, where David explains how he lost her number. Meanwhile, Richardson is alerted that David met Elise, so he transports to where they are and observes them from afar. While David and Elise are eating, one of Richardson's men brings Trainer to interrupt them. As Trainer nags, Elise tells David she's been rehearsing on Pier 17 just next to where David's going to be doing a speech, so he finally yields. While saying goodbye to one another, the two almost kiss, but Trainer interrupts him thanks to Richardson and they're stopped. The two go their separate ways. David arrives for his speech, and meanwhile, Elise's rehearsal location is then changed. David sees Richardson by a window and goes to Pier 17 in order to check on Elise. He tries to call her, but the lines are interrupted. Fed up, Richardson confronts David, but he outwits them, asserting that Richardson doesn't actually know why David and Elise need to be separated. He goes to a restaurant and asks everyone in the room if they've seen a performance by Cedar Lake Ballet Company, Elise's dance group. David gets a location of the group and then tells Richardson to back off. Suddenly, a car collides with a cab, and a policeman tells David that he's the only witness, so he needs to stay, but David realizes the cop is with Richardson. He asks the real cop and manages to get away. Afterwards, David arrives at the cab and tells the driver to run through red lights while Richardson chases him. David reaches the rehearsal studio and sees Elise, breaking Richardson's plan. Richardson warns that he'll have a more difficult time since higher-ups are now going to be involved, but David doesn't care. Later in the Adjustment Bureau building, Richardson learns that David and Elise are actually meant to be together in the past, but the plan was suddenly changed. Elise should now end up with Adrian, but remnants of the previous plan pushed her and David together. Richardson tells Harry it wasn't actually his fault, while the higher-ups take the case to someone named Thompson, who's much more capable of cleaning up the mess. Both David and Elise play in the street and enter a club. David is recognized by the people around him, so he explains he grew up in the area. He shares how seeing the Senate gallery inspired him to go into politics after his mother and brother had died. David catches himself sharing too much, but Elise just looks at him lovingly. Then they kiss. At home, as they sleep after making love, Thompson looms over them at the end of the bed. In the morning, Elise wakes up to Adrian's call, noting that it's strange he called 4 times. David probes and learns that Elise was engaged to Adrian but broke up with him after meeting David. David acknowledges her feelings, and suddenly, David remembers he has an interview, so he brings Elise along to the green room. After the interview, David is tricked into getting into the Bureau's room where he meets Thompson. David asks what happened to free will, but Thompson tells him he already gave it up for humanity after the height of the Roman Empire. However, afterwards, 5 centuries of Dark Ages had ensured so that they had to intervene again. Thompson goes on to explain the times in history where they had stopped intervening, but the world ended up in chaos. Thompson explains to David that he's going to change the world by running for president, but he can't do that when he's with Elise. David asserts his feelings aren't changing no matter what, and somehow manages to make Thompson think. Thompson then lets him go so he can watch Elise's show. In the show, David watches when suddenly Thompson appears behind him. Thompson reveals that if David stays with Elise, the trajectory of their lives will both kill them and their dreams. Instead of becoming a famous choreographer, she'll end up teaching 6-year-olds. As Thompson leaves, he nods and Elise trips in the dance. David runs to help her and takes her to a hospital. While her foot is being scanned, Thompson tells David he should blame himself, so David punches him in anger. Thompson reminds him that he'll be destroying the only thing Elise cared about. Later, David hugs Elise, tells her he's going to make some calls, and leaves her. Meanwhile, Richardson tells Harry that Thompson finished the job. He also tells him he shouldn't blame himself as he did with David's family. Harry starts to question if they're doing the right thing. 11 months later, David's popularity rose again. After David's speech, Trainer shows him a newspaper article of Elise, now a famous choreographer, announcing her marriage to Adrian. Trainer tells David to take a day off, and in a bar, David receives a message from the bartender. Soon, he meets with Harry, who tells him that the Bureau wants to separate them because Elise fulfills David's emotional void, preventing him from pursuing politics even farther. David learns from Harry that Elise is getting married tomorrow in front of a judge, so he pleads to Harry for help. Harry then teaches David how to navigate the doors by turning the knob clockwise and not counterclockwise, how to avoid Thompson, and where he needs to go to get Elise. As the ceremony begins, Harry gives his hat to David and sends him off. David runs through the rain while Thompson is alerted. David sprints like a madman, going through doors, remembering each way to avoid Thompson. Meanwhile, Thompson learns David has a hat, and David arrives at the court and goes through security. Meanwhile, Adrian becomes worried as the ceremony's about to start, but Elise is still in the bathroom, so he asks her friend to check up on her. The friend sees David and points him to where Elise is. David meets Elise in the bathroom and tells her not to marry Adrian. Angry, she pushes David away when suddenly a man with a hat enters, but David quickly knocks him out. Elise is shocked. Desperate, David reveals that the bureau to Elise, which alerts Thompson, who calls for an intervention team. David then barricades the door as the men approach them, and he tells Elise that he loves her, puts on his hat, and takes her away. David shows Elise how the doors work as they try to escape capture. As they reach the foot of the Statue of Liberty, Elise panics, so David explains what's happening and why he left her in the hospital. Desperate, David figures that he needs to meet the one who wrote the plan, the chairman. He gives Elise an option to come with him through the door with the uncertainty of getting captured, or to let him leave alone but never see him again. Elise chooses to come with him. David and Elise turn the doorknobs counterclockwise and they enter the bureau's building. Thompson isn't alerted to this, and the two go through the building, evading pursuers, and David knocks them out of the way. Meanwhile, Thompson is right on their tail. Harry Mitchell gets called to the chairman's office, and David and Elise finally reach the rooftop where they get cornered by Thompson and his team. Realizing they're hopeless, they say that I love you to each other and kiss. Suddenly, the men disappear much to their surprise. Thompson tells them they can't change their fates, but suddenly, Harry approaches and gives Thompson a folder. Thompson reads the contents and leaves. Harry reveals that Elise's and David's choices to sacrifice for the love inspired the chairman. David asks what's the plan. Harry says the chairman rewrote it, and it shows them the blank trajectory of David and Elise's path. David then asks now what Harry so takes his hat, smiles, and tells David that he can now take the stairs. Harry narrates that maybe the chairman's plan is to eventually give back people's free will. Later, the two walk down the street, ecstatic to finally choose each other. They see Harry, who nods at them. So, that's the end of the 2011 romantic sci-fi thriller The Adjustment Bureau. Do you think everyone actually has free will, or are we just operating on a set of patterns? Comment your answers below, and of course, if you enjoyed the recap, leave a like for the video and subscribe to the channel, as well as hitting that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more content updates from us. You can also check out our other video recaps here, and until next time folks, we'll see you later.